In the hushed courtroom, all eyes were fixed on the tiny figure of 5-year-old Emily Carter as she stepped toward the witness stand, clutching the leash of her therapy dog, Rex. Rex, a loyal German shepherd, stood by her side, his scarred body a reminder of his past heroics. But today, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was Emily's lifeline. The weight of the entire case rested on this child, who was the sole witness to a terrifying attempted abduction. Yet there was a critical problem. Emily hadn't spoken a word since the attack. Richard Hale, the defendant, sat across from her. He appeared calm, his smug demeanor masking the monstrous nature of his crimes. Hale, a 45-year-old software engineer, had been accused of attempting to abduct Emily, yet his defense was strong. No physical evidence, no confession, and the most crucial witness, a traumatized child who couldn't testify. Then something unexpected happened. As Emily settled into her seat, her fingers subtly twitched, a silent plea for help. In an instant, Rex's entire body went rigid, his golden eyes locked onto Hale with a piercing, unsettling focus. A low growl rumbled from his chest. The courtroom went silent. Everyone could feel the unease ripple through the room. This wasn't just the behavior of a trained therapy dog. This was instinct. Rex recognized something, and it was clear. Hale was the monster Emily couldn't speak of, but Rex could feel it. Judge Mark Sullivan, sensing the gravity of the moment, ordered a recess. What had Rex recognized, and how would it change the course of the trial? The answer would soon reveal the shocking truth that no one. In the tense silence of the courtroom, a small figure stepped forward, her tiny hand clutching the leash of a German shepherd. Emily Carter, just 5 years old, was about to become the key witness in one of the most chilling cases the city had ever seen. She had been the victim of an attempted abduction, and her testimony was the only thing that could lock away a dangerous man for life. But there was a problem. Emily hadn't spoken a word since the attack. The once chatty, vibrant little girl had fallen into a state of silence, her voice stolen by the trauma she'd endured. Judge Mark Sullivan, a seasoned man with years of experience in the courtroom, watched the child with a mixture of compassion and concern. He knew that the weight of the entire case rested on her fragile shoulders. Across from her, at the defense table, sat Richard Hale. A 45-year-old software engineer, Hale appeared completely unbothered by the gravity of the charges against him. His face was calm, almost smug, his confidence apparent despite the fact that he had been arrested after an eyewitness placed him at the scene of the attempted abduction. Hale's defense lawyer had crafted a solid strategy. No physical evidence, no confession, no reliable testimony from the traumatized child. They planned to discredit Emily's ability to identify Hale as her abductor, arguing that her silence was a sign of doubt and inconsistency. It was the perfect defense, or so they thought. But as Emily settled into the witness chair, something happened that no one could have anticipated. Emily's green eyes, wide with uncertainty, met Hale's gaze for the first time. Her small fingers, trembling slightly, made a subtle movement. To anyone else, it would have seemed almost imperceptible. But in that moment, Emily made a silent plea for help. It was a signal she had learned over weeks of therapy, one that only two beings in the room understood: Rex, the dog, and Judge Sullivan. Rex, the German shepherd, had been at Emily's side throughout her journey of healing. A retired K-9 officer with a history of heroism, Rex had suffered a brutal injury while saving lives on the job. But despite his scars and the trauma he'd endured, Rex was now Emily's emotional anchor. He was her protector, her constant companion. And in that moment, it became clear that Rex was more than just a dog. He was a silent witness to the horrors Emily had faced, and he understood her in ways no one else could. As Emily's fingers twitched in that silent plea, Rex's reaction was immediate. His body went rigid, his ears pricked forward, his muscles coiled, ready to spring into action. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that was both warning and recognition. Rex's golden brown eyes locked onto Hale, unwavering and piercing. The courtroom, which had been silent until that point, suddenly felt charged with an electric tension. The spectators stirred, whispering among themselves. Something about the dog's behavior struck a chord with everyone present. This wasn't just a therapy dog reacting to his handler's distress. This was something deeper, something primal. Judge Sullivan, who had witnessed countless cases in his career, had never seen anything like this before. The weight of the moment hit him hard. He had to take a step back and process what had just happened. His gavel came down with a force that echoed through the room, and he declared an urgent 15-minute recess. The murmur of confusion and speculation spread throughout the courtroom, but Sullivan remained calm. He glanced briefly at Emily, who was clutching Rex as though the dog were her lifeline. Something significant had just occurred, and Sullivan needed to understand exactly what it was before the trial could proceed. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway, Emily knelt beside Rex, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, knelt beside her, smoothing back Emily's curly hair with trembling fingers. Sarah's heart ached as she whispered, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" But Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her grip on Rex tightened, her small frame pressing into his side for comfort. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator on the case, watched the scene unfold from a distance. Monroe, a seasoned FBI agent with decades of experience, knew that something had just shifted. He had a gut feeling that what had just happened in the courtroom was a game changer. He stepped closer to Judge Sullivan, speaking in a low voice. "Something spooked that dog," he murmured. "I'd bet my badge that Rex recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. He didn't believe in coincidences. "Then we need to find out where," he replied. Back in the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. The smug confidence that had been present on Hale's face earlier had now twisted into something colder, more calculating. His fingers drummed against the table as he replayed the moment in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," Hale muttered under his breath. Graves raised an eyebrow, but Hale forced a small smile. "Nothing," he said, but his mind was already racing. That damn dog. Hale hadn't considered that Rex could be a problem, but now he realized Rex might just be the key to unraveling everything. As the 15-minute recess came to a close, Judge Sullivan straightened his robes and took a deep breath. He had seen many things in his years on the bench, but never had a therapy dog reacted with such undeniable certainty. Something had happened in that courtroom, something that was about to change the course of the trial. For the first time since the case began, Judge Sullivan felt the tide shifting. What had Rex recognized? What did that mean for the case? He was determined to find out. As the trial resumed, the prosecution presented a chilling case, describing a pattern of manipulation, deception, and predatory behavior. But the key piece of evidence wasn't coming from the human witnesses. It was coming from a dog who had recognized something in Richard Hale, a recognition that would lead to the ultimate unraveling of the case. The discovery that Rex had sensed something deeper than anyone realized would shift the trial into uncharted waters. What Rex knew and what Emily could never speak would soon become the turning point in the case that would see justice served. The courtroom was thick with tension as the trial of Richard Hale continued. Emily Carter, the 5-year-old child who had narrowly escaped a terrifying abduction, sat quietly beside her mother, clutching the leash of her therapy dog, Rex. The courtroom watched as the small girl, silent and fragile, became the key witness in a case that could lock away a dangerous predator for life. Despite the fact that Emily had not spoken a word since the traumatic event, all eyes were on her. Every movement, every gesture was scrutinized. The weight of the case rested entirely on her tiny shoulders. Across the room, Richard Hale sat with his lawyer, Michael Graves, trying to maintain his calm demeanor. He looked composed, almost smug as he sat in the defense chair. Hale, a 45-year-old software engineer, had been arrested after a witness placed him at the scene of the abduction attempt. But there was a major problem for the prosecution. Hale's defense was rock solid. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, no confession, and most importantly, no verbal testimony from Emily. The defense was preparing to argue that the child's silence meant she couldn't reliably identify the man who had tried to abduct her. But what they didn't anticipate was the one thing that could blow the case wide open. Rex. The German Shepherd had been with Emily through her recovery, helping her cope with the trauma of the attack. Rex was more than just a support animal. He was Emily's protector, the one who helped her navigate a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly quiet. As the trial continued, Emily took her place on the witness stand. She was hesitant, her small body trembling slightly. Despite the fear that radiated from her, she remained determined. Judge Mark Sullivan, a seasoned veteran of the courtroom, watched her closely. He knew how fragile this moment was, how the success of the entire case depended on this small, silent child. The silence in the room grew heavier as Emily settled into her seat, her eyes locked on the table, her fingers barely twitching. But then something happened. Emily's fingers trembled in what seemed like a slight, almost imperceptible movement. In that instant, Rex's reaction was immediate. The dog's body stiffened. His ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled from deep within his chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression, it was a growl of recognition. Rex's deep, golden brown eyes locked onto Richard Hale, unwavering and intense. The courtroom fell silent. The only sound the soft rumble of Rex's growl. It was an undeniable reaction. Rex wasn't just reacting to his handler's distress. He was reacting to something far deeper, something primal. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Whispers spread through the audience as they began to realize that this was no ordinary response. The dog had recognized something about Richard Hale, something only Rex could sense. Judge Sullivan, who had seen countless cases in his career, was taken aback. He had never seen a therapy dog react with such certainty before. This wasn't just a matter of Emily being unable to speak. Something had happened in that moment, and Sullivan needed to understand exactly what it was before the trial could continue. His gavel came down with a sharp crack, the sound echoing through the room. "We will take a 15-minute recess," he declared, his voice uncharacteristically urgent. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with unease. Emily knelt beside Rex, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah, bent down beside her, her fingers trembling as she stroked her daughter's curly hair. Emily didn't say a word, but her grip on Rex was tighter than ever. Something significant had just occurred in that courtroom, something that had shifted the balance of the case. FBI investigator Jack Monroe, a grizzled veteran of many child abduction cases, stood a few steps away, watching the scene unfold. Monroe had a gut instinct that had never failed him, and right now his gut was telling him that Rex had just given them the most crucial clue of the entire case. He stepped forward, speaking quietly to Judge Sullivan. "That dog knows something," he murmured. "I'd bet my badge that Rex recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing in thought. "Then we need to find out where," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. Back in the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. The smug confidence that had been present earlier was now gone, replaced by something darker, more calculating. His fingers drummed anxiously against the table as he replayed the moment in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," Hale muttered under his breath. Graves raised an eyebrow, a small hint of concern crossing his face. Hale's face twisted into a forced smile. "Nothing," he said, trying to hide his unease. But his mind was already racing. That damn dog. He hadn't considered the possibility that Rex could be a problem. As the recess drew to a close, Judge Sullivan took a deep breath. He wasn't one to believe in coincidences, and everything inside him told him that Rex's reaction was no accident. Something had shifted in the courtroom, and it was time to investigate further. As the trial resumed, the prosecution presented new evidence, linking Richard Hale to other abductions, a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior. But what was really becoming clear was that the key to this case was not just the testimonies or the physical evidence. It was Rex. Rex, the dog who had been silently standing guard by Emily's side, had given them a clue that could unravel the entire defense. The focus of the trial shifted. Suddenly, Rex was more than just a therapy dog. He had become a pivotal figure in the case, one whose reaction had given the prosecution a chance to dig deeper into Richard Hale's past. The question now was, what had Rex recognized, And how would that recognition help bring a dangerous man to justice? What followed in the next few hours would change the course of the trial forever. The investigation into Rex's recognition of Hale would soon reveal secrets no one had expected. And as the case against Richard Hale built, it became clear that the courage of a young girl and the loyalty of a dog would be the key to finally bringing justice. The tension in the courtroom had reached a boiling point as the trial against Richard Hale continued. Emily Carter, the 5-year-old girl whose life had been shattered by a traumatic attempted abduction, sat at the witness stand beside her loyal German shepherd, Rex. The entire case hinged on Emily's testimony, but there was a catch. Emily hadn't spoken a single word since the attack. The once vibrant, chatty girl had fallen silent, a victim not only of the horrifying experience, but also of the unspoken trauma that seemed to paralyze her. Richard Hale, the 45-year-old software engineer accused of the crime, sat across from Emily, exuding an unnerving calmness. His lawyer, Michael Graves, had already begun to build a defense centered on the fact that Emily couldn't speak. Without her verbal testimony, they argued, the case lacked a strong foundation. No physical evidence linked Hale directly to the crime, and Emily's silence would be used to discredit her as a witness. But what the defense had failed to anticipate was the silent strength of a dog named Rex. Rex, a retired K-9 officer with a deep scar running along his side, had been Emily's constant companion since the attack. His presence had given Emily the courage to face each day, even when the weight of her silence seemed unbearable. The bond between them was undeniable, and it was Rex who would become the unexpected hero in this trial. As Emily took the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. She sat still, her hands gripping the leash tightly, her fingers trembling slightly. Judge Mark Sullivan, a man with decades of legal experience, watched the scene closely. He knew how fragile this moment was, how the entire fate of the case rested on this tiny child who had already endured so much. He saw her hesitance, her vulnerability, and his heart went out to her. Then something remarkable happened. Emily, though silent, made a small, subtle gesture. Her fingers twitched. It was almost imperceptible, a silent signal that only two beings in the room understood: Rex and Judge Sullivan. The German shepherd's reaction was immediate and intense. His body went rigid, his ears perked forward, and a low growl rumbled from deep within his chest. The sound wasn't one of aggression, but of recognition. Rex's golden eyes locked onto Hale with an unwavering intensity, a look that sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. The reaction wasn't just noticed by the spectators, it was impossible to ignore. Something had happened in that moment. Rex had recognized something about Hale, something no one else had picked up on. The room fell silent as everyone waited for the next move. The tension was palpable, and it wasn't just the child's silence that had everyone on edge. It was the primal instinct of a dog that had sensed something darker. Judge Sullivan, who had seen his fair share of trials, was immediately intrigued. He had never seen a therapy dog react with such undeniable certainty. The growl from Rex wasn't just a coincidence. It was a warning, a sign that something deep and unsettling had been uncovered. Sullivan knew this was a turning point in the case, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. Without hesitation, Judge Sullivan called for a 15-minute recess, his gavel striking with authority. The murmur of speculation began to swirl around the room as the courtroom emptied, but Sullivan didn't move. He stayed seated, his mind racing, trying to piece together what had just occurred. What had Rex recognized, and how could this knowledge change everything? Outside in the hallway, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Emily knelt beside Rex, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, bent down beside her, brushing her daughter's hair away from her face with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with concern. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her grip on Rex was enough to show that despite everything, she still had some strength left in her. Rex was her anchor, her silent protector. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator on the case, had been watching from a distance. Monroe, a seasoned FBI agent with years of experience, had a gut feeling that whatever had just happened in the courtroom was more significant than anyone realized. He stepped forward, speaking quietly to Judge Sullivan. "Something spooked that dog," he said. his voice low and steady. "I'd bet my badge that Rex recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as he processed the information. He didn't believe in coincidences. "Then we need to find out where," he replied, his voice firm with resolve. Inside the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. Hale had been calm, almost smug, but the moment Rex reacted, his demeanor shifted. His fingers drummed nervously against the table as he replayed the scene in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," Hale muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with fear. Graves raised an eyebrow, sensing the change in his client's demeanor. Hale tried to force a small smile, but it was clear that he was rattled. "Nothing," he said, attempting to brush it off, but his mind was already racing. That damn dog. He hadn't considered the possibility that Rex could be a threat to his defense. As the recess drew to a close, Judge Sullivan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had seen many trials, many twists and turns, but never had he witnessed a therapy dog react in such a way. This was no ordinary case, and the connection between Emily and Rex was far more significant than anyone had realized. When the trial resumed, the prosecution presented new evidence that linked Richard Hale to multiple abductions. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the most important revelation hadn't come from the evidence. It had come from Rex. The dog had recognized something in Hale, something deep and instinctual. It was that recognition that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of Hale's carefully crafted defense. As the investigation progressed, the truth began to unfold. Rex, the therapy dog, had become the key to the case. What he knew, and what Emily had been unable to say, was about to change everything. The silent bond between a girl and her dog had revealed the truth that no one could deny. Rex had given them the final clue needed to bring a dangerous predator to justice. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. All eyes were on 5-year-old Emily Carter, sitting silently beside her therapy dog, Rex, as she prepared to take the witness stand. The young girl's silence spoke volumes, her fragile figure a stark contrast to the heavy weight of the trial that hung in the air. Emily was the key witness in one of the most chilling attempted abduction cases the city had seen. But there was a massive hurdle. Emily hadn't spoken a word since the attack, and the defense had already begun to use her silence as a weapon. Across the courtroom, Richard Hale sat at the defense table, exuding a calm, almost smug demeanor. At 45 years old, Hale was a software engineer with a seemingly unassuming appearance. Yet behind that facade, he was the man accused of attempting to abduct Emily. Witnesses had placed him at the scene, but there was a crucial flaw in the prosecution's case. There was no solid evidence, no physical proof, no confession, and worst of all, a traumatized child who couldn't testify. Hale's defense team was already preparing to discredit Emily's credibility, using her silence as a tool to undermine her ability to identify him. But what neither Hale nor his lawyer had anticipated was the silent, unshakable bond between Emily and her therapy dog, Rex. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was Emily's protector, her anchor in the storm of trauma she had been through. This German shepherd, once a decorated K-9 officer, now wore the scars of his own battles. But despite his own injuries, Rex had remained by Emily's side through every moment of fear, providing comfort when nothing else could. As the trial began, Emily made her way to the witness stand, clutching the leash tightly in her small hand. She was hesitant, her small body trembling ever so slightly, but there was a determination in her that was impossible to ignore. Judge Mark Sullivan, a man who had presided over countless cases in his career, watched her carefully. He had seen many children take the stand in his time, but Emily's situation was unique. She wasn't just a child caught in a horrific event. She was a child whose trauma had stripped her of her voice, leaving her with nothing but the silent presence of the dog at her side. But as Emily settled into the witness chair, something incredible happened. Her fingers twitched, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. It was a subtle gesture, one that would have gone unnoticed by most in the room, but it was a signal, a silent plea for help. Only two beings in the courtroom recognized it: Emily's dog, Rex, and Judge Sullivan. The reaction was instantaneous. Rex, who had been sitting calmly beside Emily, went rigid. His ears pricked forward and his body tensed. His deep, golden brown eyes locked onto Richard Hale with a chilling intensity. And then a low, guttural growl rumbled deep within Rex's chest, a sound that sent a wave of unease through the courtroom. This wasn't a typical reaction from a therapy dog. It wasn't just concern for his handler. This was something deeper, something instinctive. Rex wasn't just reacting to Emily's distress. He was recognizing something. He was recognizing Hale. The courtroom, which had been silent just moments before, was now filled with a palpable tension. Whispers spread through the spectators as they watched the dog's reaction, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Rex wasn't just a well-trained animal. He had reacted to Hale as though he knew him, knew something about him that no one else in the room did. Judge Sullivan, who had seen his fair share of dramatic moments in the courtroom, was taken aback. He had never seen anything like this before. A therapy dog, trained to provide emotional support, had reacted with such certainty. What had Rex recognized? What was the connection between Hale and this dog? The question weighed heavily on Sullivan's mind. Something significant had just happened, and he needed to understand it before the trial could proceed. Without hesitation, Sullivan called for a 15-minute recess. His gavel struck the wood with authority, the sound echoing through the room. The murmurs of speculation grew louder as the courtroom emptied, but Sullivan remained seated, his mind racing. What had just occurred? What did Rex know, and how could it change the course of the trial? In the hallway, the air was thick with tension. Emily knelt beside Rex, gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, bent down beside her, smoothing her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with concern. Emily didn't respond, but the look on her face said everything. She was scared, but she was also holding on to something. Something solid, something unshakable. It was Rex. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator on the case, had been watching from a distance. He was no stranger to gut feelings, and right now, his instincts were screaming at him. Something had happened in that courtroom that was more than just a coincidence. He stepped closer to Judge Sullivan, speaking in a low voice. "That dog knows something," he murmured. "I'd bet my badge that Rex recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. He didn't believe in coincidences. "Then we need to find out where," he said, his voice filled with resolve. Back in the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat across from his attorney, Michael Graves. The smug confidence that had been etched on Hale's face throughout the trial was now gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. His fingers drummed nervously against the table. He replayed the moment in his mind, trying to make sense of it. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," Hale muttered under his breath. Graves raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in his client's demeanor. Hale forced a small smile. "Nothing," he said, but his mind was already racing. That damn dog. He hadn't considered Rex to be a threat, but now he realized Rex might be the key to unraveling everything. As the 15-minute recess ended, Judge Sullivan took a seat again, his mind made up. This trial was no longer just about the child's silence. It was about what Rex had recognized and how it would change everything. The truth was about to come to light, just not in the way anyone had expected. The trial resumed, and the focus shifted. Emily's silence wasn't her only weapon. Rex's reaction to Hale had given the prosecution an unexpected advantage. What Rex knew, and what Emily had been unable to say, would soon be uncovered, and it was clear. The trial was taking a turn no one could have predicted. And as the investigation into Hale's past continued, it became obvious. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the final, unspoken witness. What he had recognized in Richard Hale was about to bring justice to a child who had lost her voice, but not her courage. The courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of spectators, all waiting for the next phase of the trial. The tension was thick as the case against Richard Hale, the 45-year-old software engineer accused of attempting to abduct 5-year-old Emily Carter, hung in the balance. But there was one thing no one had predicted: the silent strength of a child and her dog. Emily had been the key witness, but she hadn't spoken a word since the attack. Yet in that silence, a story was unfolding, one that would reveal the truth in a way no one expected. Emily sat next to her therapy dog, Rex, her tiny fingers clutching the leash tightly. The German shepherd, with his deep golden brown eyes and scar along his side, sat alert and unmoving beside her. To anyone else, he might seem like just another well-trained dog, but for Emily, he was more than that. He was her protector, her constant companion, and perhaps the one who would unlock the mystery that had remained hidden for far too long. Emily's silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a shield, one that had been built by trauma and fear. And Rex was the only one who could understand her in ways that no one else could. Richard Hale, on the other hand, seemed to be in complete control. He sat across the courtroom with his lawyer, Michael Graves, exuding an eerie calm. His appearance was unremarkable. Nothing about him screamed dangerous, and yet the weight of his crimes loomed over the proceedings. Hale had been placed at the scene by an eyewitness, and yet his defense was airtight. There was no physical evidence, no confession, and the one piece of testimony that could put him away, a traumatized 5-year-old girl, was now under attack. The defense had already begun to craft a narrative, one that would discredit Emily's testimony because of her silence. But then something happened that would change everything. Emily, though silent, had made a small gesture, one that could easily have been missed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. Her fingers twitched, barely noticeable, but it was a signal. It was something she had learned over weeks of therapy, a way to communicate with the one being who understood her completely, Rex. And Rex's reaction was immediate. As soon as Emily's fingers moved, the German shepherd's body went rigid. His muscles tensed, his ears pricked up, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. It wasn't just a reaction to Emily's distress. It was something deeper, something instinctive. Rex's golden eyes locked onto Richard Hale, and in that moment, the courtroom fell silent. It wasn't just a growl, it was a warning. It was a signal that Rex had recognized something, someone who had no place in this room. The spectators in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling through the crowd. Everyone felt the weight of what had just occurred. This wasn't just an emotional response from a dog. This was a primal reaction. Rex had recognized Richard Hale, and in that instant, the case had taken a turn. What had Hale done to trigger such a response from the dog? What did Rex know that no one else had seen? Judge Mark Sullivan, a man with years of experience in the courtroom, was taken aback. He had witnessed many dramatic moments in his career, but never had he seen a therapy dog react in such a way. Something about Rex's behavior was different. Something significant had just happened. Sullivan's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "We will take a 15-minute recess," he declared, his voice unusually urgent. Outside in the hallway, the tension only increased. Emily knelt beside Rex, her small hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Sarah Carter, bent down beside her, brushing the child's curly hair away from her face. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Sarah whispered, her voice filled with concern. Emily didn't respond, but the grip on Rex's fur told her everything. Emily was still terrified, but she had found something to hold on to, a silent strength in the form of a dog who had never left her side. Jack Monroe, the lead investigator, watched from a few feet away. His instincts, honed over decades of experience, told him that something had just shifted. He had seen enough cases to know when a clue had just dropped in their laps. "That dog knows something," Monroe murmured to Sullivan, his voice low and serious. "I'd bet my badge that Rex recognizes Hale from somewhere." Sullivan nodded slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. He didn't believe in coincidences. "Then we need to find out where," he replied. Back in the defense's private room, Richard Hale sat, his expression no longer one of calm arrogance. He was rattled. The dog, Rex, had reacted in a way that he hadn't expected. His fingers drummed nervously against the table as he replayed the scene in his mind. "She knows," he muttered, referring to Emily's subtle signal. "The dog knows," he added in a more frantic tone. Graves, his lawyer, raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in Hale's demeanor. Hale forced a small smile, trying to appear unaffected, but it was clear that he was beginning to unravel. "I don't know what you're talking about," Hale said, his voice tight with anxiety. But deep inside, he knew. He had been caught off guard. Rex had reacted to him. The dog knew something that no one had yet figured out. And suddenly, Hale realized that the dog was no longer just a silent bystander. Rex had become the pivotal piece of the puzzle. As the trial resumed, the prosecution presented new evidence. Forensic analysis had linked soil samples found in Hale's van to a remote, abandoned cabin, one that hadn't been on the investigators' radar until now. This was the break they needed, the one piece that could potentially tie Hale to other disappearances. But more importantly, it was Rex's reaction to Hale that had given them the nudge to dig deeper. The investigation shifted into high gear. Rex, the silent hero, had provided them with the clue that would lead to the discovery of more victims, including Emma Sullivan, a young girl who had been missing for months. When the cabin was found, the search team uncovered a basement where Emma was held captive, alive but chained. Rex's growls had signaled that the cabin was important, that it held the key to everything. And when Emma was rescued, the truth began to unfold. The final blow came in the courtroom. As Emma's rescue was presented as evidence, Richard Hale's composure began to crack. With the discovery of Emma's survival, the case against him grew undeniable. And then Rex, the dog who had silently protected Emily, once again recognized Hale. This time, it was enough to push Hale into a corner. In a moment of desperation, he changed his plea. The trial had abruptly ended, and Hale was sentenced to life in prison. For Emily, the girl who had lost her voice but never her courage, this moment marked the end of a long journey. And for Rex, the loyal German shepherd, his bond with Emily had led them to justice, quietly but undeniably. The courtroom had seen the power of a bond that transcended words, a silent strength that had made all the difference in the world. In the midst of a gripping trial, the silence of 5-year-old Emily Carter spoke louder than words ever could. Her trauma had stolen her voice, leaving her unable to testify against Richard Hale, the man who had tried to abduct her. But there was one thing Hale hadn't accounted for: Emily's loyal companion, Rex. The German shepherd, once a K-9 officer, had been by Emily's side through every moment of fear. When Emily's fingers twitched, signaling a silent plea for help, Rex's response was immediate. His body went rigid, and his golden eyes locked onto Hale with an unwavering intensity. A low growl rumbled from deep within his chest. It was more than just a reaction. It was recognition. In that moment, the courtroom fell silent, the tension rising. What had Rex recognized? Judge Mark Sullivan called a recess, knowing something crucial had just unfolded. Outside the courtroom, FBI investigator Jack Monroe had a gut feeling. "That dog knows something," he murmured. The investigation shifted focus, and soon the shocking discovery came to light. Rex had led them to a remote cabin where Emma Sullivan, another victim, had been held captive. The case was no longer just about a silent girl. It was about a bond that had broken open the truth, leading to a predator's downfall.